This is Northwest Public Television, KWSU-TV from Pullman.
Good evening. Welcome to Counterpoint here on KWSU-TV for Thursday, February the 12th. On this program, you'll hear from Bill Hall, who's the editorial page editor for the Lewiston Morning Tribune and generally represents the liberal views, and Doug Wilson, a Moscow minister who represents conservative views. He also writes for the Idahonian and the Daily News of Pullman. The way our program works, in case you've just joined us, you'll hear, first of all, an editorial or a commentator for each their views, and then you'll hear a response, and then later we'll have a grab bag where we'll hear different topics. But first of all, here's Bill Hall.
I think it's about time we started teaching coyote in the biology classes of America. It is time we started teaching how he and yellow jacket and bear and skunk helped prepare the earth for the arrival of humankind. We now teach the bizarre notion in the public school biology classes and in some liberal church schools that humans evolved from the lower animals. We now teach that humans ascended from the apes, if you can believe that. From coyote maybe, but surely not the apes. And there are also those who hold to the even more extraordinary notion that God created Earth and humans and all that other stuff in a scant 6 days, in the blink of a mighty eye, and then rested on the 7th, as anyone would have to after such a remarkable labor. And those who believe in that theory, the creationist theory of our coming into being, are rightly miffed that their theory is not included, along with evolution, the ape theory, in the biology classrooms of America. After all, they say, evolution is just a theory, and so a second theory should be taught right along with it, their theory, the creationist theory. And I say a third. If evolution is nothing but a theory, no better and perhaps even worse than creationism as an explanation for our existence, then one theory should be as good as another, regardless of scientific basis. And so we should also teach the theory of our friends and neighbors, the Nez Perce Indians, as to how we all came to be in this place in space and time. And that, as I loosely understand it, is that the old man created the spiritual forces, and that among them were yellow jacket, ant, bear, skunk, and the wise and revered coyote. And like the Greek gods of old, another theory worth teaching, they prepared the earth for our arrival. And then we sprang somewhat inexplicably out of nowhere, not unlike the daughters-in-law of Adam and Eve. If evolution is just another theory of how we came to be, deserving only of equal time in the public school classrooms, then so too is Christian creationism, and the Nez Perce version of how we came to be, and the Buddhist, and the Hindu, and all the others, countless in number, new worlds without end. If evolution is truly nothing more than just another theory, springing more from the heart and the imagination than from the mind, then perhaps it should have no more than equal time. If it is no more provable than all the dozens of religious explanations for the creation of the earth and its slow inhabitants, then why should it be supreme? And perhaps there should be equal time in the classroom for all the theories of our emergence, most especially including the story of wise old Coyote and his animal clan. Or do the creationists assert that Coyote and his colleagues are a simple childish notion, while the creation of Earth and us in 6 literal days is solid scientific fact? I fear that somewhere out there on the windy Nez Perce hills and plains, clever old Coyote is observing gatherings such as these, pointing his nose to the silvery moon and howling with laughter that the creatures he paved the way for have progressed no farther than this. Doug?
Well, when it comes to the teaching of evolution in government schools, public schools, I don't really have an objection. The government schools are a fitting place or a receptacle for that sort of teaching, which is just crazy. I think it was Malcolm Muggeridge who said, in retrospect, evolution will be seen as one of the great jokes of history, which is what I consider it to be. It is just a scientific insanity.
He said it in retrospect within his own life, too, because he said it when he'd become a senile old fool. Earlier in his life, he believed it.
But my
and
question
defended it.
is this. If you want to teach evolution, I don't imagine why anybody would want to teach something so crazy. Next thing you'd be...
crazy as coyote.
Or teach the Earth,
Or
a
six-day
flat Earth,
creation.
or a flat Earth on the back of a tortoise. If you want to teach that sort of thing, that's fine. But if you're going to teach evolution, why don't you teach all of it? For example, Charles Darwin, in The Descent of Man, said that the Negro and the gorilla occupied a space on the evolutionary ladder between the baboons and the civilized races. Do you think that aspect of Darwinism should be taught in our public schools?
You should indeed teach what Darwin said on that. You should not present it as fact because it has since been disproved. You should never present to the children in these schools the possibility that Darwin, Bill Hall, or anybody else is always right all of the time.
So you think that Darwin, when he taught that, and many other early evolutionists who taught that were just flat dead wrong scientifically?
Yes, I do. I think that evolution is a developing theory. It is a theory, but it is one with a tremendous amount of proof, not just scientifically, but I'm a farm boy. There's proof in the barnyard every year in the development of cattle.
Cows turn into chickens?
No, the cows turn into better cows. They do. And it's not just the thresh.
All by themselves?
Yeah, no, not all by themselves. It takes a bull. And a wise farmer knowing
And
which bull to put together.
a wise farmer?
And
what does the wise farmer compare to?
What is
the creator, perhaps? The one overseeing the whole process?
No, he's not as important as God or a minister. He's just a farmer doing his job, which is helping evolution along a little faster.
Look, the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the most well-established scientific laws.
This is going to be a boring show.
The second law of thermodynamics says, is basically a variation of Murphy's law. Things go from order to disorder, not the other way around. The theory of evolution says that chaos produced order, disorder produced order, and it's simply a scientific impossibility.
Well, let me tell you this. When I was a boy, they used to have tall dandelions, and we kept mowing them, and the only ones that survived are the flat ones, and that's why we have flat dandelions now, and that's evolution.
You had flat dandelions before you started mowing, for crying out loud.
No, evolution has developed before your very eyes.
Now, look, you didn't turn tall dandelions into short dandelions.
A whole generation of lawnmowers did.
Well, I guess it's time to cut off the dandelions a little bit and bring out the mower and move on to our next topic. Here's Doug Wilson.
The liberal mind is not without its prejudices, and one of them is an abhorrence of any kind of discrimination. By a happy accident, this has occasionally resulted in reasonable positions, such as the belief that blacks should not be second-class citizens. But having a defensible position was apparently too big a strain, and so liberals quickly found ways to apply their opposition to discrimination in other, more eccentric ways. One of the more recent and bizarre manifestations of this practice can be seen in the response to AIDS. Here we have a public health threat of monumental proportions, and liberals seem more concerned about discrimination than about public safety. I confess that I'm at a loss to explain it. One possible reason is that the primary group suffering from the syndrome is the homosexual population, and the gay segment of our society has successfully achieved victim status in the eyes of the liberals. Now, obviously, given the current legal climate, it is a good thing to be a bona fide victim of discrimination. And because gays are now considered to be the victims of society and not of their own lusts, the liberal has to go to bat for them, no matter how much of a threat they become. Just imagine what the liberal response would be if all these deaths were being caused by passive cigarette smoke or NutraSweet. This calls for an explanation. But not just anyone is capable of such a task. We need someone who is clever enough to defend the unreasonable. Bill?
I'm at a loss as to understand this latest pink-garb straw man of yours. What is your objection that, what are the liberals doing? They're standing up for the rights of people with AIDS to work at their jobs? Is that what you're complaining about?
No, what I'm saying is that AIDS is not in the same category as having black skin or being a woman. It is not something that is unrelated to the person's behavior, and it is not something that is unrelated to the health of those people surrounding you. So no matter what the racist thinks of black people, at least the racist doesn't think that it's catching. The people that are concerned about
Well, I certainly agree with you. The question, of course, is it catching? I would ban from public jobs, public schools, hospitals. There was a doctor with AIDS the other day in the news. All people with any communicable disease that anyone is likely to catch, even if not very likely. But I have seen nothing yet to indicate that is so, except in a few circumstances, such as that doctor, and they have moved him out of the front lines.
So so you do agree, in principle, that if AIDS can be shown to be a massive public health threat to the public in general, then that would justify quote-unquote discrimination, what used to be called quarantine.
Yes, I would quarantine anybody with any disease that he is likely to pass on to anyone else by casual contact.
Okay, so the next question is, this disease just recently hit our society in a big way. Do you think we know enough about it to know how much of a threat it is?
I don't think you do. I think I do. I've done a lot of reading on this. I don't think there's a single member of your own medical community in Moscow, Pullman, including the most conservative one, who would agree with you on this kind of mythical thing of we don't know for sure about this. I think they're pretty darn sure on this. They're sure enough for safety's sake.
No, I think that we're sure enough to educate people about what's really going on, but the concern that I have is that all the public education I've seen with regard to AIDS skirts the issue. In other words, they talk about safe sex, and they talk about condoms, and they talk about all these things, but they don't actually define why the male homosexual population is at such a great risk. They don't describe what type of sex to avoid, what sort of situations call for condoms.
The articles I've read most certainly do explain that. It's anal sex, among other things. That's the prime risk.
That's the prime risk, but that's not the way it is trumpeted abroad.
Well, I don't know about abroad. I only know my own newspapers and my own magazines that I read, and once again, I find I'm better informed than you are on this.
Well, let's put it this way.
By the way, I am not one of those liberals who is against discrimination. I believe in discriminating against the parents who let their children run wild in grocery stores, running the baskets up and down the aisle. I would keep them out of the grocery stores.
I confess I'm at a loss to explain how we got onto this.
Time now for our grab bag section here on Counterpoint, where we start turning to various topics of recent interest. If you'd like to send in a topic that you would like to hear from these two gentlemen, like to hear them discuss, you can send it into Counterpoint, KWSU Television, Murrow Center, Pullman, Washington, 99164. Our first question will go to Doug, and it sort of relates to where we just sort of left off with that last discussion. Television executives are now on Capitol Hill defending their ban on condom ads. Is the ban a good idea? Would such ads be so offensive to the viewing audience? And don't we have any more offensive material going out on the airways each day? And we just had a recent case here last Sunday where a Unitarian minister handed out condoms in the Sunday service. What's your position on that? I know it's multi-parted there.
Well, there are many delicate things that are advertised. Hemorrhoidal ointment, diarrhea medicine. There's all sorts of things that are advertised on television. Those are delicate questions. And condom advertising obviously involves questions of delicacy in the same way, but there's something else with condom advertising that you don't have with these other things, and that is the question of morality. It appears to me that what is happening is people are being instructed in responsible promiscuity. One of the ads that I've seen is, if you're going to sleep with someone that you don't know about, then do it this way. It's like saying, if you're going to steal something or if you're going to do something wrong, then here's how to do it without getting caught. And it's that tacit endorsement of the immorality that I object to. It's not the question of delicacy, because advertisers are very good at euphemisms, and they're very good at dancing around delicate subjects. They've done it for years. It's the morality that I find objectionable.
Well, the day you succeed in banning promiscuity, then I think I would agree with you. But there are some other products that are advertised that involve morality. Beer, for instance, is advertised incessantly on television. A lot of people have religious objections to that. I have some ethical objections to selling people all sorts of potions and creams and eyeshadow and stuff like that, and telling them it'll make them wonderful and sexually attractive. I think that teaches some sort of false values, that it's only pretty people that matter, and you better get pretty and make us rich in the process, or you ain't dirt in this country.
The point is not whether you agree with the morality of the person that is pushing cosmetics. You can say, well, that's not I don't think that's as important as they apparently think it's important, and you can object to it ethically or religiously. The problem with condom advertising is that you're dealing with a fundamental human relationship. You're dealing with a fundamental building block of human society. And I believe that this tacit statement that it is all right to be immoral as long as you do it in such a way that you don't get caught, so long as your promiscuity is responsible.
It's an oxymoron. That's an
oxymoron.
inference on your part. That's not the implication of those ads, or maybe that's what they would like to make you think. But I don't draw that at all. I think responsibility is moral. And people are going to have sex out of wedlock. They've got their little glands churning, those kids out there, and they're going to have sex out of wedlock. And I will grant you this. I was thinking about this earlier today, that maybe advertising condoms and giving condoms out to kids, I'd hand them out like popcorn on the streets rather than all these teenage pregnancies. You are going to end up with 80% engaging in sex instead of 75%, but the trade-off is you end up with a lot fewer babies.
Perhaps we're talking about two different campaigns. As I understood it, the most recent ad campaign that the condom manufacturers are pushing is the condom as a protection against AIDS. But the condom is only a protection against AIDS if you're intending on, one, engaging in anal sex, not normal heterosexual sex, and secondly, if you're engaging that kind of sex with someone you don't really know very well. That is irresponsible right down to the core, that kind of behavior, and then to try to superimpose the responsibility of using a condom on top of that is...
Well, first of all, you can't get rid of irresponsibility. It's going to go on, so you might as well add responsibility to that, to the immorality that you're talking about.
But can you combine irresponsibility and responsibility?
But I don't know why we aren't advertising birth control for every purpose, including married heterosexual sex on television.
The issue is not birth control, the issue is self-control. Because our society has lost its ability its ability in self-government, sexually and in many other ways,
humankind was born through evolution with a lack of self-control.
No.
It's just like dandelions. You just can't control them. They just won't. They keep breeding the little devils. There's a lot of pollinating going on in this world, Doug Wilson. And you can't stop it with your moralizing and with your laws and with your censoring television.
Bill, the better I get to know you, the more I have to bow to you as a master of the non sequitur. I don't know how we get on some of the subjects we get on. We're talking.
See, you're just practicing what you're preaching against my doing.
Well, whatever, if it's either dandelions or whatever, let's move on to the next question. This one will go to Bill. In regard to the recent Whitehead surrogate mother suit, gentlemen, you are the jury now. Who should get custody of the child? In such a case, the natural mother or the mother who has a contract stating the baby is hers?
The mother who has the contract and the real father of that baby, I think in this case, should get that baby. There is a contract, a legally binding contract. We think it's legally binding, and it should be adhered to unless there is some countervailing evidence, such as evidence that these new parents are mentally ill or they're beating the child or something like that. The mother, though, the natural mother, is in kind of a catch-22, it strikes me. The only way she she shouldn't get that baby back unless she can prove that she was mentally ill at the time she signed the contract, and that's the catch-22. If she was mentally ill and perhaps still is, then should you give that baby to her? I think she knew what she was doing. She signed the contract, and maybe she shouldn't have done it, but there it is.
The child should go to the natural father and the woman that has the contract saying that the child is hers. If we've allowed such a contract to be made, the terms of the contract should be honored. But I have a major ethical problem with such contracts being allowed in the first place because it puts you in an awkward position. Everyone involved seems to have a just claim, and they seem to have a just claim because of the nature of the case. I don't think that surrogate mothering is a good idea for that very reason, because you've got an intolerable conflict between...
How about surrogate fathering, sperm banks?
I have an ethical question with that, but you wouldn't have the same legal wrangles that you have now about who gets the baby.
Yeah, there's anonymity there. The father himself doesn't know, as I understand.
Right, but with surrogate motherhood, in the very nature of the case, you could very easily have a conflict over whose child this is, and it would take the wisdom of a Solomon to know how to decide between the two.
And if this natural mother gets any more flaky on nightly TV, she'll be risking the loss of the children she already had.
Okay, this next question goes to Doug first. Travel restrictions to Lebanon
Is it an infringement on our constitutional rights to restrict American travel to a country?
It is not an infringement of our constitutional right, because there are two things. Citizens of the United States have the right to expect the protection of the United States when they travel abroad. The United States government, I believe, has an obligation to protect our citizens when they travel abroad. If they have determined that in a certain area of the globe, they are not going to be able to extend that protection, which they are required to extend, I believe they have the right to say, if you go here, then we've washed our hands of it. We cannot take responsibility for what happens to you if you go into this area that's run by crazies. So it's not a violation of our constitutional rights. I believe it's a question of the government doing what it ought to do, protect its citizens.
Yeah, I think if they go in there fully warned, as you would going into Lebanon today, then if you want to take the risk, that's your business. Don't expect the U.S. Marines to come in and risk their lives to get you. I could think of one situation maybe where there's some sort of a terrible pestilence or radioactivity or something like that. You might say to somebody, we don't want you going in there and coming back out to the United States. But of course, the way to deal with that is go ahead if you're an idiot. We're just not letting you back in the country if you're contaminated.
Okay, Bill, a week and a half ago, the United States conducted the first underground nuclear test of 1987. Test was made despite Soviet warnings it would mean an end to their unilateral test ban. Was the test a good idea?
I don't think the test is necessary. I think it's superfluous in the United States and in the Soviet Union, and I think both governments are fraudulent in their claims that only they are pure. They're both going to try to upgrade their weapons any way they can, and the only thing that will hold them back is cost. They're trying to hold down the cost of a larger weaponry. Neither one of these governments intends to give up nuclear weapons.
I don't have enough technical or scientific expertise to know whether this particular test was necessary to keep our weapons systems upgraded. But of course, we should keep our weapon systems upgraded, and whether we test or not test should have absolutely nothing to do with whether the Soviets object or not. They are the most renowned cheaters in the world, and they're only doing what they're doing, this unilateral...
My question is, what do they need the tests for? I mean, they must have a zillion different kinds of bombs doing a zillion different things. What's this one, to kill dandelions, maybe?
Or to kill questions. Let's move on to the next one here. Sanctuary movement is the topic. Are clergy really doing wrong by providing sanctuary for some illegal aliens? Isn't it more wrong to send them back to a country they don't want to live in? Will we really prosecute our religious leaders for this act of mercy?
This act of mercy, quote unquote, is actually an act of propaganda. There are more political trouble spots in Central America than you can shake a stick at, and lo and behold, the sanctuary movement only has people fleeing from right-wing oppression. If you're dealing with genuine refugees, of course you don't turn them back, and if you're dealing with genuine refugees whose lives are threatened back home, of course they shouldn't have to go to some liberal church to get sanctuary. They should be able to just show up at the United States border and get political asylum.
That's exactly right. It's the government that's wrong, not these good-hearted, naive people. I think that it is propaganda on their part. They're being heroic in defense of their belief and trying to make a statement against this war. But I kind of believe in the Martin Luther King way of dealing with this sort of thing. When you are standing against society, perhaps, and government, you should be prepared to take the legal consequences. That is the sacrifice you're seeking to make and the point you're seeking to make. I admire them, but I think they're a little bit vainglorious at the same time.
I admire their dedication, but I think they have tunnel vision. They think there's only one class of oppressees in Central America.
Takes one to know one, Doug.
Okay, Bill, can we expect other nations to hang tough after the Iran scandal? Why shouldn't West Germany trade a prisoner for some of their hostages? Didn't we trade them arms for ours?
Well, to tell you the truth, I thought at one point of writing an editorial saying that if the West Germans traded with them, released these hostages, we should sever diplomatic relations with them, that we should make a dramatic statement against this idiocy of risking the lives of everyone by showing terrorists that this pays off. The reason I hesitated to write that editorial is how do I write that? How do I look down my nose at the Germans who are thinking of cutting and running on this when my own country has just led the cut and run?
The problem is that you can't make the correct point, as Bill says, without being accused of hypocrisy. If the American government makes the statement, no no deals for hostages, there's no way to make that point without appearing to be hypocritical, because you are in fact being hypocritical. There's only one way out, and that way out is for the United States government to say, one, we messed up when we traded arms for hostages at all. I don't object to contacts with Iran, and I don't object to jockeying for position in the post-Khomeini Iran. I don't object to any of that, but dealing for hostages was just a bad idea right out of the starting blocks. We should say that we were wrong in doing it and then go back to the status quo ante. We go back to the way it was before and take the hard line.
Yeah, I don't object to trying to open up a dialogue there or something, as Richard Nixon did with Red China. But it's the same, it's the dealing with them on hostages. This must not be, or we are all in danger.
In addition, the line, back before all this happened, the line was, we don't know who's holding these people, all right? But we knew where the connections were enough to make some kind of a deal. And if we know where those connections are, in order to make some kind of a deal, our policy ought to be this. We ought to issue a list of states that sponsor terrorism. They would include countries like Syria, Iran, Libya, and say whenever a terrorist act happens, whenever a hostage is taken, for every American hostage taken, Iran loses one oil refinery. That's just the way it is. And you say, well, we don't know about the connection. We knew enough of a connection to negotiate for the hostages. I think there ought to be regular, systematic airstrikes against states that sponsor terrorism every time an act of terrorism is committed.
George Shultz, the Secretary of State, said something this week about he didn't want to talk too much about the latest hostage because he thought that just rewarded the terrorists and gave them what they wanted. I think he's onto something there. I would make it a policy, the United States, every time an American hostage is grabbed, whatever you do behind the scenes, go ahead and do it. But don't comment anymore. Don't have the president go forward and say this is a terrible act and so on and so forth. I really think there is a certain reward in that.
Not only is that wise, but there should be another embargo, and that is whenever a terrorist act occurs, not whenever it occurs, but frequently it is, people say this is another cowardly act. Well, I remember when the terrorist blew up the Marine barracks in Lebanon. It was denounced as a cowardly act. That was the last thing it was. It was a cowardly act. It was a very brave act. It was a mixed-up act, but you can't just get out there and call terrorist names. You have to have action, not words.
Right. Well, you can see there's actually agreement here between these two. Let's see if this one here brings on a little disagreement. Doug, should ousted Philippine leader Ferdinand Marcos be given so much freedom in our country, almost left to return to his country on a rented plane 2 weeks ago? U.S. State Department officials apparently didn't even seem to know about it.
Well, they knew enough about it to stop him from going back. If he went back, it would mean civil war. And there's no way that civil war would advance the U.S. interests in that region, nor would it advance our interest to let Cory Aquino continue on the route she's going. We've got to do something. We're sleeping in the bed that we've made.
Should he be put under house arrest, so to speak?
Well, he should be kept from going back to the Philippines.
I think there was probably some sort of a quid pro quo there, an agreement that we'd get him out of the country and keep him out if people opposing him would put the lid back on the country. So maybe there's a bargain there I don't know about that should be kept, but a person is tempted to let this hero go home.
But if he goes home, that means civil war.
I don't really think so anymore. I think she has temporarily at least achieved such a high level of popularity, what was that, more than 3 to 1, that new Constitution was approved, that I think he would, I think he could rally all 37 of his supporters around him. And
this one's for you, Bill. With all the fingerprinting photo filing of the children all across the country to help recover them if they become missing, are we only teaching them to become paranoid?
I don't know, but an awful lot of psychiatrists and psychologists seem to think so, and I'm inclined to go along with them. That seems to be a massive majority opinion, that the number of disappearing children in this country